Hello and welcome to Heartlight Vedic Astrology. Today I was going to talk about transits or Gochara from the Vedic Astrology or Jyotish perspective for May of 2022. So just a note first, the information presented here is for educational purposes only and should not be considered medical, financial, professional, or life advice of any kind. If you are in need, please contact an appropriate professional for support. And even though this is a video about transits or Gochara, just please note that transits are often considered last when evaluating a horoscope in Vedic astrology or Jyotish. So the Lagna or ascendant rising sign, yogas, planetary combinations, amshas, subzodiacs, and bhava or houses. That kind of analysis is done first, and then transits are looked at because they may signal times when events are triggered. But it has to be, you have to see the potential within a chart for the transits to really be relevant. And this, always depends on individual factors such as what dasha or planetary period someone is currently in. So again, take all this with a grain of salt. If you want an example of how to go through the various layers of analysis that I just mentioned, just to understand the process of the Vedic astrologer, you might want to see my video, Anatomy of an Eclipse, from April 2022. So let's get into it though. And again, in Vedic astrology, this month is going to be a lot calmer than last month, because last month literally every planet shifted signs. So there was a lot of, it was really about kind of rearranging the foundation of really life as we know it for everybody. Everybody was touched by that. This month, again, relatively calmer, but still plenty going on. And all those in Vedic astrology or Jyotish, we really mostly focus on slow-moving planets, because they're only moving signs and the slow moving planets are Jupiter, Saturn, and Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon. Jupiter only switches signs every year, Rahu and Ketu only switch signs every year and a half, and Saturn only switches signs about every 2.5 years. So we look at those planets mostly because they're in a sign for a more prolonged period of time, then they have more influence potentially on events. So keep that in mind as well. But let's just go through the dates for May, and then I'll get into what all these, can potentially, how they might manifest or what they might indicate, for people. Again, considering that this is a general reading. So May 10th, Mars just went retrograde, and it's going to be retrograde until June 3rd. And Mercury also is going combust, or just went combust, and it will stay combust until May 29th. So Mercury's got a few different things going on there. But it's actually mostly about condition more than, it's not changing signs, it's just the condition of Mercury's changing. May 14th, the Sun is moving into Taurus or Vishaka. May 16th, so this is probably the biggest event all month, and involves the Moon, the Sun, Rahu, and Ketu, because there's a total lunar eclipse or Chandragrahan going on. May 17th, so the day after, right after the eclipse, Mars is moving into Pisces or Meena. May 23rd, Venus is moving into Aries or Misha. And May 25th, Saturn is moving out of Sandhi in Aquarius or Kumbha. So Sandhi means a joint, and Sandhi, when a planet is in Sandhi, it means it's in the first or last degree of a sign. So because it's switching signs, it's really sort of fundamentally changing its energy, so it's kind of in a unstable position. So again, that's a little bit more about quality of planet rather than transit, but again, a move is a move, right? So let's go through Mercury and Sun first in terms of those effects. So May 10th, Mercury went retrograde, which is called Vakri in Sanskrit. and Mercury or Buddha, when any planet is in retrograde condition, it's considered to gain strength. And the themes of Mercury include communication, commerce, community, friends, aunts and uncles, details, because Mercury tends to be very detail-oriented, thoughts and ideas, writing, intellect, and decision-making. So these are the sorts of things that are implicated by Mercury. And Mercury is currently in Taurus or Vishaka. And Taurus is a friendly sign for Mercury. Mercury is an air sign, so it's all about kind of ideas and flitting about, really. And so it's actually kind of nice for Mercury to be in Taurus because it's going to have more of a grounding effect because Taurus is a fixed earth sign. And it's also ruled by Venus, so Venus is a very sort of congenial planet. So it's actually kind of a nice place for Mercury to sort of, settle down a bit. And ground itself, in a pleasant way. And then on May 13th, Mercury's going combust, and it'll stay combust until May 29th. Combust is Asta in Sanskrit. So in general, when a planet or a graha goes combust, what that means is it's eclipsed by the sun because it's very close to the sun. It's usually within 9 degrees or so of the sun. And so the sun is going to eclipse that planet. And what that means is that you won't visibly, you can't visibly see that planet in the sky anymore. And that also means that the outward effects of Mercury, the material effects, like things that you can see in the everyday, so of the themes of Mercury, for example, commerce and community and friends and stuff like that, it may not kind of act on that level, at least initially, because the planet's qualities go inward. So a combust Mercury, for example, may mean that there's development of intellect or reasoning or decision making, again depending on the position and condition in the birth chart, the natal birth chart. So actually a combust Mercury, for example, can indicate really incredible intellect, like Einstein had a combust Mercury. So it's not always necessarily a bad thing. It's just more about the quality or strength of the planet. Combustion is actually considered a weakness, but because the weakness is more on sort of the material plane or the visible level of things. Again, all that mercurial energy goes deep within, sort of submarines within somebody, and so there's a lot potentially of intellect and reasoning and analytical ability for people, potentially, not always with Mercury combust. Some people become very irrational if they have Mercury combust, so you always have to consider this in the complete context of somebody's own chart. So Mercury is going to kind of do a deep dive here. So there may be a lot going on the inner level of decision making and planning and trying to make a decision about things, analyzing things, gathering information, talking to oneself, that sort of thing. On May 14th, the sun is moving into Taurus or Vishaka. The sun was in Aries or Misha, where it was exalted, so the sun was exceptionally strong over the last month. And it was in Aries, or a fire sign, and the sun is obviously a fire planet, so there was a lot of potentially gaining of strength in terms of figuring out purpose in life or goals in life, that sort of thing. And so moving into Taurus is an unfriendly sign for sun, so it's not entirely comfortable there. So there may be this feeling of sort of like some loss of enthusiasm or purpose, or losing steam a bit, just because of the sun transiting signs. So that's Mercury and Sun. So the big event on May 16th, there's going to be a total lunar eclipse, and that's going to happen at 4:14. The apex of that is going to be about 4:14 UTC time. And so this is the chart for that time. And you can see this is a North Indian style chart. So you can see in the top diamond there's a little 9 in the corner. 9 represents the 9th sign of the zodiac, or Sagittarius. So this moment in time is going to be ruled, Sagittarius is ruled by Jupiter, so this moment in time is going to be ruled by Jupiter. Luckily, Jupiter is in a positive sign in the 4th house in its own sign, so it's going to be very strong, and it forms what's called a Hamsa Yoga. Hamsa Yoga is related to virtuousness and spirituality and learned, education, learnedness, piousness, that sort of thing. Oratory skills. So that's great. So that means that there's some strength in this chart. But the planets are really still, in flux quite a bit, and the angling of them all, creates some disruptions as well. So when I look at this chart, there are actually a few different scenarios that came to mind. So the first one actually was actually legal action regarding women and children's rights. Jupiter represents the law and justice, and so it's sitting here, in its own house. So those themes are going to be strong. Jupiter also represents children, and it's with Venus right now. Venus represents women, and because Jupiter aspects 9 houses away, it's actually, you can see the arrow there, it's actually influencing the moon, which is up in the top right corner there, the 12th house. And the moon also represents women. So that's where I was kind of getting the law, legal action, oratory, especially regarding women. And Mars, you can see Mars is at 29 degrees 15 seconds. So the next day Mars is moving into this house, and Venus will be moving out. So Mars and Jupiter together, when those two planets aspect each other or they're in combination, conjoined, Mars is a fighting planet and an innovative planet and a risk-taking planet. And again, Jupiter can be law. So when Mars and Jupiter come together in certain combinations, that can indicate like lawyers or legal things. Like I have one person whose chart I read, and she had Jupiter and Mars aspecting into her 1st house of personality. And she happened to work for the legal department for the state for like 25 years. And she had this kind of way about her that, she was a pretty, how do I say, she was a pretty contentious person, actually. I mean, a good person, don't get me wrong. She was a good person, good-hearted, but, it's just, whenever you said, black, she said white. Whenever you said white, she said black. Like, it was just kind of her nature. So she ended up, she wasn't a lawyer, but she worked in the legal field for 25 years. So there may be actually a lot of legal stuff going on, and this reminded, this is reminiscent of what's going on in the United States right now, where there's a lot of upheaval going on with protests going on in support or against of abortion rights. So it looks like that's going to, be an issue for a while. Jupiter's going to be in that sign for a year. So that could be one kind of storyline from all of this. Another storyline that came up when I was looking at this chart, and this is a little bit more specifically for people who are Sagittarius rising, because this would be their chart, or Gemini rising, because Gemini is directly opposite of Sagittarius, is that you can see in the 5th house here, so you can count signs. You start on the top diamond, and then you go counterclockwise, and you count inclusively. So the top diamond is 1, and then you go back 2, 3, 4, 5. So the 5th house is the first sign, Aries, and we have Rahu there. Rahu is the north node of the moon. And it can indicate things like confusion, illusion, delusion, but also like technology, that sort of thing. And it's being aspected by Saturn, which is in Sunday. It's not in a very stable position. And Saturn just entered Aquarius from Capricorn. So Saturn is shifting energies from being more of a concrete, material, practical energy to Aquarius, which is much more, it's an air sign, so it's all about kind of ideas and theories and, philosophy and stuff like that. Almost like, I think, Elon Musk and Tesla, that sort of thing. NASA, that's the kind of energy Aquarius contains. So Saturn is aspecting Rahu, and the fifth house represents children, creativity, the arts, that sort of thing. So with Saturn aspecting the fifth house and Rahu being in the fifth house, and those are two malefic planets, this may indicate that like Sagittarius people are having difficulty having children, or having difficulty getting creative projects off the ground, that sort of thing. And because Saturn and Rahu both represent foreignness, and Rahu represents technology, this may indicate for those folks that over the next year or so, because Jupiter's going to transit into this house next year at the end of May, they may have children on the mind. They may be thinking about having children or other creative projects, and they may want to consider, because these two malefic planets, it may actually be difficult to have a biological pregnancy. They may want to consider getting involved with IVF or surrogacy or adoption, that sort of thing, because it also reflects, K2, the south node of the moon, is in Sagittarius' 11th house, which would be the 5th house for their partner. So it's 5 houses away from their partner. Their partner house is the 7th house, or Gemini in this chart. So there can be difficulties. So they may want to consider how they go about having children, if they're up in the air about it. And the thing, though, too, is that this eclipse, which is formed by these planets here, Rahu and Sun, I've circled in the corner, K2 and Moon in the upper corner, and Mercury, again, is very close by because it's being eclipsed by the Sun. So this sort of axis here, it's interesting because the Moon represents the mind in general, so sensory impressions, imagination, dreaming, feelings, emotion, thoughts, like it's, everything that the mind kind of takes in. And Mercury is the intellect and reasoning and decision making, so Mercury kind of decides what to do with all the information that's coming through the mind. And because you have Rahu and K2 here, and Rahu and K2 again represent illusion, delusion, confusion, it can be mental health issues, that sort of thing. This sort of placement is going to be pretty hard on the mind in general and decision making. It may seem very cloudy, and so there may be difficulties with mental health and decision making. Luckily, though, Jupiter aspects 9 houses away, so we have a direct aspect of Jupiter on the moon, which is good. That'll help a bit in terms of optimism and enthusiasm and that sort of thing. But again, if you look at these circled planets here, Rahu and K2 just changed signs, so they're becoming more stable, but they're fresh in that new groove. Sun is just 1 degree 8 minutes into its sign, and Moon 1 degree 8 minutes into its sign. So they just literally switched signs like a day yesterday, or the day before this eclipse. And again, Mercury's not too far away. So again, this could be this kind of energy lineup with the planets could be like new epiphanies, new decisions, new kind of lines of reasoning, that sort of thing. This is going to be a very mental, and again, because Mercury's deep within, right? It's combust and it's retrograde, so there's going to be a lot of thinking, and it may not seem initially like there's a lot of clarity, but that should clear up within a few days after the eclipse. And I did mention that Jupiter's aspecting the moon, so there's some beneficial support there, but actually Saturn is also aspecting the moon as well. So Jupiter's the great benefic, and Saturn's considered the great malefic. So there is going to be a little bit of a tug of war on the whole mind. So again, need to kind of decision making and starting new things may not be the best during this time, and it's generally not the best time during eclipses, unless you happen to be the type of person who's thinking, wow, my life is too much in a rut and very safe and very too predictable, and I need to shake things up. Then go ahead and start something new during this time, but it may be more of a roller coaster than you're really up for, frankly. And then another storyline that kind of came to me is that it happens that May 15th, so the day before this eclipse, it's what's called the Buddha Purnima, and it's celebrated in East Asia, and it's considered the day that Buddha was enlightened. And what's interesting is that, again, Mercury is involved in this whole eclipse, and again, Mercury is all about the intellect, and actually the Dalai Lama, for example, is a Gemini rising in Vedic astrology, so he's very mercurial himself. And in my mind, Buddhism is very much kind of a spiritual system, religious system related to the mind. And, it's all about taking a step back and examining, thoughts and decisions rather than just getting led around by emotions. So again, the timing here wasn't lost on me. And the thing is, again, this moon being aspected by Jupiter, which represents spirituality as well, and represents a teacher. And the Saturn aspecting, this eclipse on both sides, really, because it's aspecting Rahu and it's aspecting the moon. And Saturn represents like antiquity, and it represents structure. And so I could also very much see, and in this particular chart, this particular lineup with the Sagittarius rising, the moon and sun and Mercury, they're all aspecting the 12th house, and the 12th house can indicate foreign things, foreign places, but also places of isolation like a hospital. It can also indicate places of isolation like an ashram or a temple or something like that. So I could very much see how this sort of lineup might indicate for some people that they might be considering some sort of spiritual, it could be a spiritual awakening, frankly. It could be somebody deciding that they want to pursue some sort of spiritual path, especially something like meditation or Buddhism. And with a teacher, maybe they encounter a teacher who can lead them, well in that kind of path or tradition. Because the other thing is that Jupiter here is in the 4th house. The 4th house represents the mother, so it may be, that, through the mother, maybe the mother's involved in some sort of spiritual group or path or system, paradigm that is picked up here. But the 4th house also represents like ancestors and lineage and genetics and things like that. So it may be that, somebody's stepping into the flow of a particular lineage of spirituality that could be very much like Buddhism or meditation or something like that. That's very much about, observing the mind, detachment, really considerate and self-reflective type of practice. In yoga, at least, we talk about there are different paths in yoga. There's like bhakti yoga, which is like the path of devotion. So people find, their connection with oneness or God or nature or the source, whatever you want to call it, through more heart-based devotional practices like singing or dancing or chanting, that sort of thing. But there's also another path called jnana yoga, which is really the path of the mind. And so people are in this sort of path, which in my mind, Buddhism is more of this sort of tradition. I don't know of too many Buddhists who dance around ecstatically, but maybe they do. Maybe that's just my limited, experience with it. But, to me, most Buddhists that I've encountered, it's really about the mind, and it's really about detaching from emotions and clarity of the mind. So so again, this could be a moment where somebody steps into a tradition like that, not necessarily Buddhism, but something like that. Again, this is also, just so you know, I mean, Sagittarius is a dual sign, and so that's part of the reason why I wrote a few different sort of, storylines potentially coming from the sort of chart, because there's probably going to be more than one storyline, especially if you happen to be a dual sign rising, so that's Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, or Pisces, because you're going to be either Mercury based chart or lead chart or Jupiter based chart. And the other thing is, I did look at the D9. The D9 can indicate, strength of planets. And so the strongest planets in the D9, or the sub-zodiac for this chart, are Mercury, Jupiter, and Saturn. So again, those are going to be strong planets. There's, if you dig a little bit, there's strength to those planets. And then if you look at the Dasha sequence, again, if somebody, for example, was born at this particular moment, the first 3 years or so would be in Jupiter, and then the next big chunk of time would be in Saturn, and then Mercury. So again, that's indicating that the three major players in this particular chart, in this particular moment, are Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury. And here's just a photo from Time and Date about the eclipse path for May 16th. So eclipses tend to have, it's thought that eclipses tend to have more an effect wherever they can be visualized. And so most of the world is going to be affected by this, as you can see. Notable exceptions would be Russia. So that may mean that they're not necessarily going to be, shifting their position, unfortunately, with the Ukrainian war anytime soon. East Asia, Australia, may be a little bit, this information may not be as relevant if you're in those places in the world. But again, most of the world will probably feel this. And then the other transits going on, so again, mostly minor transits here. Mars is moving into Pisces or Mina on May 17th, so the day after the eclipse. And Mars will be conjoining Jupiter in its own sign. Mars and Jupiter are friendly with each other, so Mars should be well supported here. And usually when you have Mars and Jupiter together, I mentioned the legal, that can indicate legal things. But there's going to be a lot of enthusiasm here. I mean, Mars is like an innovator and Jupiter's optimism, so you get those two together and it's like, somebody who can go gangbusters, and initiation of new activities. But it can also potentially indicate things like impulsiveness as well. So there you go. On May 23rd, Venus is moving into Aries or Misha. It was in Pisces with Jupiter. Venus is exalted in Pisces, Jupiter's in its own sign, so probably for the last month. It's been a little bit of the honeymoon period for some things in life. But it's now moving into Aries. Aries is an enemy sign for Venus. It's not going to be very comfortable. It's not going to show its best or full effects here. But this might indicate, because Aries is the first sign of the natural zodiac and it's a fire sign. And fire is all about kind of, initiating things and transforming things. This may be new beginnings for art, relationships, and women. It's also aspected by Saturn and Aquarius, and again, Saturn and Aquarius is really about infrastructure and old ideas. And then again, with Mars shifting and Venus shifting into these positions, that just sort of there's just adding confluence to this idea of this current situation in the U.S. regarding fights and protests over abortion rights ideology is probably going to be ongoing. I don't think it's going to be short-lived, because Jupiter is going to be in that position for a year. And Saturn is in Aquarius for a couple months, and then it's actually retrograding back into Capricorn in July, and then coming back into Aquarius in January. So there's going to be some shifting about. things that may not be entirely clear for a while on what's going on that front. And I did also mention on May 25th, Saturn is moving out of Sandhi in Aquarius, or Kumbha. So Sandhi means, I mentioned this, a planet is in the first or last degree of a sign, and it's a place of weakness or instability because the fundamental energy of planet is shifting, because it's sort of the sign it's in has a very different energy. So it might get stronger or weaker. It might indicate other things. So it will, by getting out of Sandhi, Saturn will stabilize, but only temporarily, because again, it's retrograding back in Capricorn or Makara in July, and it'll stay there until January 2023. So there's still, it's mostly movement forward, but, you know, again, in the fall, early winter, it may feel like we're sort of moving backwards before Saturn kind of ties up loose ends and things in Capricorn, before it finally leaves completely in January of 2023. So that's Mars, Venus, and Saturn going on in May. So there you have it, transits for May in Vedic astrology, with a bit of interpretation. Again, take it all with a grain of salt. It's just very generalized interpretation of the energies and how they're shifting over the next few weeks. But I hope you found this helpful and educational, and perhaps even enlightening. Thank you for your time, and until the next one, namaste.